When the battle itself was actually joined on 22nd of April, what happened is the Chinese waded across the Imjin and they launched their attack. And the British troops were immediately put onto the defensive. They immediately began to be cut off from each other, isolated. You know, there's large-scale artillery coming in. There's waves and waves of Chinese assaults coming in as well. And what the British soon find themselves plunged into is the bloodiest engagement the armies fought since the Second World War. And for 3 days, the British 29th Independent Infantry Brigade thwarted the Chinese spring offensive. This was the absolute crucial point of this attack. The Chinese were getting so close to overrunning the British positions that the British were calling down artillery on their own positions to try and clear them and defend them. You know, this is unbelievably close quarter fighting. This is brutal. This is hand to hand, and it's really quite amazing to think about. You know, in an age of Korea, in war, where jet fighters were dogfighting in the skies above. You know, this seemed in this age of modernity that actually there was a series of fighting that weren't so different from what had taken place in the First World War or even earlier. You know, throughout these days and nights that the British are fighting, they're trying to stop the Chinese getting around them. They're trying to stop the Chinese getting through them. They're being forced into ever smaller perimeters. You know, at one stage, for example, the tanks of the 8th Hussars have been sent up from their position behind them to try and support the infantry battalions to, you know, bring their heavier guns to bear and that sort of thing. But the Chinese have got around some of these British positions, and actually they start to, you know, swarm the tanks, and they're trying to climb on them with sticky bombs they're going to mount on the hulls to explode. And the tanks are having to sweep each other's hulls with machine gun fire to clear the Chinese off them. You know, this is not tank warfare as you perhaps imagine it. And ultimately, the British fought on until 25th of April, where ultimately the decision was given to withdraw. It was the position was untenable. It couldn't be held any longer. They were running out of ammunition. They were at risk of being completely cut off and annihilated. And so ultimately, the battle comes to an end on the 25th of April. And, you know, the brigade had lost a quarter of its strength. You know, they'd suffered more than 1,000 casualties. The Gloucesters had suffered 622 casualties, which effectively rendered them combat ineffective as a battalion. You know, there were other forces taking part in this battle as well. Obviously, the British action was only part of a wider campaign, and you know, the US had lost thousands as well. The South Koreans, who were also fighting and shouldn't be neglected in this, had lost up to 8,000. But Chinese casualties overall were estimated at 70,000 throughout this, which gives you an idea about the sheer numbers of people they were throwing into this battle and the intensity of the fighting. So significantly, whilst ultimately the British were forced to retreat and they'd taken quite heavy casualties, the 29th Brigade stand provided crucial time for the UN forces to regroup, to ultimately block that Chinese advance on Seoul. In the Imjin fight in itself also marked the end of the mobile phase of the war. And because of their stand, because they held there, the Chinese advance ground to a halt. And because the resulting stalemate and then a resulting intensified air attack on North Korea and a naval blockade, ultimately it proved that the Chinese and North Koreans didn't have the capacity to defeat the UN in battle, and they didn't have the capacity to win the war. As such, this brought both sides to the negotiating table. And had it not been for this intensity of action, this fighting, you know, the Chinese would have swept right through, captured Seoul, and could have won the war.